Hi everyone, I'm going to show you a tutorial about how to color in images so they have lots of depth and interest, such as this image, Perfect Peacock by Stampin' Up. So this stamp is a solo stamp. It only comes in wood mount. So when you get it, you have to put it together, which I've done, and it takes up pretty much the entire face of a card. So I think that it's nice just on its own, as long as you color it in and give it a lot of detail. Obviously, there's plenty of other uses for it as well, but this is how I've chosen to begin playing with it, I guess. So what I do is I just take a piece of card that's about 10.5 centimeters wide by 14.8 centimeters long. So that's just A5 by 10.5. I don't choose to stamp with black ink when I do watercoloring. I think it just gives a nice, a much nicer effect, especially for a peacock. It just adds a little bit of sparkle, as you can see in those feathers there. And the way I've done that is with embossing powder. Now, if you've never done heat embossing, be careful because it's really addictive. Every time I heat emboss, I just think, oh my gosh, this is so fun. So to do that, we're going to start just by putting Versamark all over the peacock. Versamark is not an ink, really. It's kind of a sticky sort of oil. So because it's a big stamp in a small pad, I'm just going to tap all over like this. Now, if you don't have Versamark, if you just want to use black ink, that's absolutely fine. StazOn or Memento ink pad, those are really good for watercoloring because they're not going to go anywhere. They're not going to bleed. They are permanent ink for you to color things in. But I think it's a little bit more forgiving when I want to do watercoloring sorts of effects, because when you start coloring in each tiny segment, the embossing, because it's raised, it sort of stops you from crossing lines. And I just happen to like that. And it's an excuse to do some more embossing, so that's my friend. Here is just my takeaway tub full of my Stampin' Up! Black embossing powder. In order to emboss, you just pour the powder over the image and shake. Now you shake down, shake back up, just to make sure that you've really got it everywhere. I have a makeup brush which I have dedicated to embossing powder, and I just like to use that, tap off all the excess like that. I forgot to mention, before you begin, you should always run an embossing buddy over your paper. That just absorbs the oils and makes sure that the powder's only sticking to where you stamped. Here's a good example of what happens when you don't use an embossing buddy. I've got a whole lot of black powder along the side. Now that's fine. People aren't going to care. If you show them a really beautiful image like this, they're going to go, ooh, that's nice, and they're just not even going to see that. But if you happen to be a perfectionist, get an embossing buddy. So here's one that I've already prepared, which I did use an embossing buddy. And that the black powder is a bit tricky, so it does like to linger, but it has a lot less of it on this one. So once you've got all the powder shaken on it, you use a heat tool, go zhuzh all over the place, and it turns that powder into a nice shiny sort of plastic and gives you that beautiful effect. Now for the coloring in, really quite simple. Let me just put this other sheet down because there's not a bunch of powder all over it. Okay. The coloring in, I'm using these ink pads, and I'm using this blender pen. Now, if you've never seen how that works, you squish the ink pad to the lid, and then when you open it, you've got a bit of ink on the thing, which you use to pick up some color and color in. Now, if you don't like your ink pads messy, you can put it on plastic or, you know, hard shiny surface, or you can use like a marker with the brush tip of our Stampin' Up markers. If you color on the surface, you can then pick up the ink with your blender pen and use it that way. I find that if I use the ink pad to put some ink on a thing like that, to pick it up and color it in, I end up wasting ink. I end up wiping it off. So although it does for 2 seconds make your ink pads look funny, I think it's worth it to keep it on there so you don't have to keep on wasting ink for absolutely no reason. I only have the Brights pads right now, so those are the only ones that I'm using, and I'm not even using all of them. I'm going to use 5 different colors. I've got Old Olive, Pumpkin Pie, Melon Mambo, Bermuda Bay, and Pacific Point. So I'm going to begin by showing you how to color this in. Now, as I did this last night, I've already squished my ink onto there, so I don't need to do it again. Now, when I color in, I think about a couple of things. Where are the lines? Where are the edges? I've never taken an art class, but they do say consider a light source. There's got to be a light source coming from somewhere. So let's say the light source is here, shining right onto the peacock. If it's shining here, it's going to make this area brighter with some of these receding to the background. And this part here, and here, and here, and here, and here, those are going to be a bit brighter. Now, how do you do that? Well, consider this. If I take my blender pen and I pick up some ink, the first time that I mark is going to be dark, but it's going to lighten up with every go. You see that? So, what I did with this last night in order to get this sort of effect is I considered that and I started coloring in half of the feathers at a time. I'll tell you what I mean by that. So I've got my Old Olive here, and here's the ones along the edges. Now I'm going to start here, for instance, and color in that, because being along the edge, that'll be more in the shadows than any of the others. Now, lucky for me, I have a picture of a peacock on my wall, so I was able to mostly copy the colors. So I'm going to carry on with the Old Olive, freshly picking up the ink so it's nice and dark, just on there. And let me tell you, it is very therapeutic to sit there and do that, not be bothered by anybody. Maybe kids are at school or something. It's just nice to have a bit of me time. Right, so I've begun doing that. You get the hint. So I would pick up again and then come on this side and make these ones dark just along the edge as well. Now, if you've marked on it and you think it's not dark enough, pick up more ink and go again in the same spot. So I've lost a bit of ink there, for instance. I just pick up more and go again in the same spot, and that darkens it. Okay, so carrying on, going down there, and you get the hint all the way to the bottom. Around the bottom, I would make these ones darker than the ones above them, for instance, because if you think about it, the light is going to cascade and catch more of these ones than it will at the bottom here. So you want this general area to be lighter than down around and on the sides. So for these ones in the middle, I decided that in order to give it a bit of shining, shimmering depth, I would begin coloring this half. I'd color the entire half with whatever was on the marker, and then I would go for the next bit. Okay, so already you can see half of that feather is darker than the other half. Okay, so we'll go again. I'm picking up a bit of ink. I'm going to go here first, and let's say I still have plenty of ink. I'll go here next, and then I'll come back and do this one. I'm not doing a very good job of staying in the lines, but you can't even tell. So already I've got a bit of depth in the feathers, see? Now I'm going to pause this video, carry on doing just the green part of the feathers, and move on to the next step, okay? So if you've got this at home and you're following along, carry on. Okay, so I've gone through the tail, and I'm just trying to show you in the light bit here. I've colored in all the green bits of the feather. Now, I'm not done with the green yet, so you might want to, you know, jump to the blue part of the feather or something like that. Don't just yet. Keep your green open. You've got it for a couple of more things yet. Next thing I'm going to do is get, well, first, sorry, let me go back. I've kept it dark along the edges, like I said, and tried to make it lighter in the middle. When you're coloring in, always try to keep to half of the feather in one go and complete a whole half of the feather before re-inking to do the other side, because if you don't, what you're going to end up with is splotchy looking color. It'll look a lot better if you stay with the whole part of something before going to the other part. So this particular feather here, for instance, I did this entire half and then came back to the top, did the entire other half. I didn't come and do halfway here, pick up more ink and do it halfway there, because that would have made the bottom half darker or so than the rest of it, and it would just look weird. So in order to keep it flowing, do as I've said. So, oh, I've missed a little bit here. There we go. Okay, so that's all in. The other places that I need a bit of green are this flower stem here, and like sort of the first half of this inner space on each of these, okay? So I'll do these stems, and I'll pick up a little bit more green and go back on there to make them darker, and then all these inner bits here. And then the next bit, with the green as well, you want to keep it light though, is just run a circle around, not the very inner circle because that's going to be blue, but just around that, because that color on a peacock is like a tannish sort of color, which I've achieved by mixing this color here. I've achieved that by coloring the green down first and then pumpkin pie over the top. I've kept the green light as I've done it because I don't want it to be too green, nor do I want it to be too pumpkin pie. I just want it to be a lovely blend of both of the colors. Right, so I'm going to pause the video, do what I've just said, and come back. Okay, so I have colored a circle around each of the outer circles, because you'll see it's the little black dot, then a circle around that, and a circle around that. So it's the last circle I've colored in that green. Here at the top, considering the light source, these top bits are going to be darker, so I've colored those in more completely and with darker ink than the rest. Now, if you aren't sure how to make sure that your ink is too dark in your blender pen, couple of things. When I first press this ink down, if I pick up that where it's darker here in these little teeny tiny dots, then my marker is going to be more inked, okay? If I go where I've already picked up the ink, that's going to be, well, I had a bunch of ink in there, but it's going to be lighter than before. So if you want less, like more ink, you go to the dots where it's more concentrated, where you haven't picked it up yet. If you want it lighter, go to the part where you've already picked up and just, you know, tap tap instead of trying to get a bunch in. When I color in the leaves, I want to start with a bit of darker ink. I'm going to show you this leaf here. Okay, see there's the line in the middle. A leaf is going to kind of crease like this in the middle. So what I do with leaves is I just go down the center again and again, pick up a bit more ink, center line again and again, and then I come out to the edges. Out, 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 out. And sometimes I don't even go to the very edge. I just leave it a little bit white. And that gives a bit of dimension in the leaf. Makes it look just slightly more 3D. So once again, you start just coloring the center. The more times you go over it, the darker it is. Pick up a bit more ink because I want that to look sort of similar on there. And just on the very tips, I might make them a little green, but not too green. I'm going to leave them mostly untouched, and that leaf now has dimension. One more time. Not so, more on this smaller side, because I'm thinking that that's going to have more concentrated color, isn't it? This is where the leaf is bending, so the light source is going to be shining down here. So I want to be more concerned about everywhere else besides this part where the light will be shining. Okay, so once again, some dimension on that leaf there. I know I keep putting it right in the corner here, but this is where all the light is because of how I've configured the camera, so I apologize. Here I've got a couple more leaves. I'm not so much going anywhere else but in the very center, and the rest of the leaf will kind of color itself. So very center, just that line. Super, super simple. One more leaf. Line, 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 line down the middle, then going out. So everywhere else I've colored gets less swipes than the very center, and then it just looks amazing. Okay, so the next thing we've got, what did I do here? Okay, before I put the green away, where there's little loops like this, okay, the outside of the loop, that's a darker green. So I colored light green in the center here because I'm going to color pumpkin pie over that. But around that is a rim of dark green. And I know that because I'm looking at the picture of the peacock on the wall, and that's what it shows there. So once again, I'm going to pause the video, put a bit more ink down here because I'm running out, and make sure that those loops around there are really dark. Okay. Okay, when I re-inked, I must have pressed it too hard, or maybe because it was a bit wet, it got quite a lot of ink out of my ink pad. That's fine. It's just there for a lot more peacocks to color in. So now I've done dark green loops around there. The way I've done that is when I've had ink on my blender pen, I've just very, very lightly touched the tip, just like that, over the thing. Barely touching it. Then to get the color out of the blender pen, because I tend to not use different blender pens unless I absolutely have to, so you just mark until they stop producing color. That's how you know that all of the color has come out of there. So with all the color out of there, everything green that I needed, I'm going to then move on to let's say the pumpkin pie. And I'm choosing the pumpkin pie so that I can just complete most of the feathers. So I'm going to get it inky up there on the lid. Okay, here's my little peacock. Now, what do I need to do? I need to collect some pumpkin pie. I'll start with it really inky, and I'll go straight to these flowers. What I've done with the flowers is, again, in the center, I'm hoping you can see this, as I do the flowers, just right there in the center of the petals first, then making sure I have plenty of ink, just doing it again, but this time sort of toward the edges. Okay, super simple. And more dimension, as I mentioned before, than if you were to color it any other way. So there we go. I did the little lines first, then colored the rest in. The ones behind and below are going to be darker than the ones above. Okay, and then this little bud here as well. I'm going to say that one's orange. And this guy back here. Okay. I haven't quite colored in the very center of this. I've left that quite pale as well, because I just think where the center of a flower is, that's where all the pollen is going to be, and it's going to be a bit yellow. So if I just leave it a little bit light, that should take care of itself. Next place I want to put orange is just right here in the center, just really light. Center of these flowers, which I am actually going to make pink. Next place I want orange is in these little circles, not the outer loops where I made them really dark green, but the outer circles. And I don't want it orange orange, I just want a tint of orange, because that's the shiny tan brownish kind of color. Now I'm running out of ink here, and that's okay. That's good, because like I said, I want that less dark than on the other sides, and I did exactly what I said not to do. I made that one too inky right there. So right there, that one's too inky, so that became a little bit darker. So I'm going to just adjust it so that I can just make sure I'm not having the really dark ones in the center. If you happen to accidentally make it really dark in the center, then just darken the ones around the edges and even it out. Or carry on as normal and people probably won't even notice. But as I said, if you want to know how inky your pen is, just mark here. Okay, that pen's not very inky. Has to pick up more, significantly more inky. Okay, so I've got those ones. Just going to even them out. As you can see, I'm not being too careful because it doesn't matter too much. It's watercolor and it is meant to be unusual, you know, bleed together, be unique. Okay, so now I'm going to use that orange again, make sure it's not too much, and do that little circle around the inner circles. Now that's going to take me a while, trying to be very precise, doing just those circles there. So I'm going to pause the video, do those, and come back to you. Alright, so we've finished with all the orange. Just coloring over the little circles and the feathers there and on the back there. So next we're going to go to Pacific Point. Again, oops, I pressed too hard again. That's a lot of ink. I'm going to make sure that I get all of the color out of there. Now Pacific Point, it's quite obvious that we're going to go in the center here, okay? And that can be quite dark, that's fine. I'm actually going to go over that with Bermuda Bay in a second. But in order to begin, That is really, really dark. I'm going to come along here and mark like this. Okay, so I've started with the blue just down at the bottom because that's where there's going to be most shadow, and picking some up like that, just making sure I don't have too much. Again at the bottom, coming up like that. Now I've gone with too little at the bottom, coming up. Okay, so I do sort of longish brush strokes, blending up as I go. Now, I think there's also going to be a bit of shadow here around this edge of the wing. So I'm going to make a few lines like that. And then once more, a bit of shadow right here where it connects there. And just a few swipe, 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 swipe. Okay, now again, here at the neck, I'll just add the shadow there. And then here, you can imagine the feathers would ruffle up a bit, so it would be a bit darker there. Also, don't forget just these little dots here up top. Okay, so I'll show you what I do. I'm just swiping, making sure I have enough but not too much color. And leaving this little area here for last. Now with this Whisper White paper that I'm using, it's not the thick Whisper White, it's just regular Whisper White. Why? Because that's what I'm used to, that's what I know. I know Stampin' Up! Have done a lot of changes, but I sort of wasn't involved when they did all that, so I'm sticking to the old Whisper White. So what I'm going to make sure I don't do is scrub back and forth, because that causes rips in the paper, and I absolutely don't want that. So not forgetting here, the top of the head, I'm going to leave the little bit around the eye white, because my picture on the wall tells me that's what they look like. And I'm not planning on taking any artistic license at this time. Okay, so there we go. I have colored in the peacock there, but I'm not done, because I'm going to add a bit of dimension to this bird using Bermuda Bay, and I'll show you what I do in a second. First, I'm going to color in all the inner circles here. I can just color straight over the black, see, with the blue, the Pacific point. So I'll pause the video and come back to you. I just wanted to show you that it doesn't take a long time to do this. I'm just doing a little circle, 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 circle. This is so super simple. For those of you who are intimidated by coloring, please don't be. It is way simpler than you think. There's lots of things that I did not do because I just thought, well, that's going to be really hard, but have turned out to be so easy. I could do them every day for the rest of my life and not mind. So don't let the fear of the unknown stop you here. See? Easy. Okay. I've outstepped the line there, but I bet you can't tell. So I'm just going to mark again these little dots up top just to make them darker. Okay, so now I'm going to empty my marker of Bermuda Bay, and to do that I just twist the marker as, like, twist, see, as I mark like that, and it gets it all out. So next color is Bermuda Bay. Okay, I'm going to pick some up here. And I do want it to be quite dark because what's going to happen is a sort of magical effect here. See all these little black lines? I'm going to trace over them with the Bermuda Bay. Just touch, touch, touch. And it looks really dark at first, but because the paper is already a bit wet and because of the nature of these blender pens, what it's going to do is blend it, really. They'll sort of bleed together, mesh together, whatever you want to call it. And they'll look really good. Okay, almost done with that there. Okay, now I still have a bit of the Bermuda Bay on my pen. I'm going to come back over where this peacock's head is, and there, and around here. And I'm going to just kind of go over where I was before, like where I would have started with the Pacific point before, and do a little bit of blending, because peacocks are blue, yes, but when they shine from the other side, they're also a little bit green, and that's what this adds. So I'm going to get it really inky again, and come and do these little things up top again. Of course you don't have to, I just think it adds that extra little thing. Get it inky again, come and do all the little blue circles. Not paying too much attention, just scribble, 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 move on. Ink again. If I'm going to ink again, I'm going to start at the outside, because the outside ones want more color than the inside ones. And there we go. Okay, so here's how we look so far. The last thing to do is just those pink flowers. Now you can see I've gone outside the lines just a tiny bit, just right there, and a couple other ones, but if I were, selling it as